Hi there, I'm your host, Mr. Doyle, and this is a great undertaking. Today I'm going to be ranking all of the stories from Stephen King's 1993 collection of short stories, Nightmares and Dreamscapes. This is going to be the longest video I've ever made. It's like 8,500 words, and I usually write like 3,000 words for a video, so dear Jesus, why did I do that? I tried like hell to have this video done in time for Halloween, and I'm recording it the night before, so I guess we'll see if I can manage to get it edited in time. So if this video does come out on Halloween, happy fucking Halloween! Holy shit, it's the most magical time of the year, and Christmas can suck it! I hope you get some candy and throw eggs and toilet paper at the houses of the people who have wronged you, or maybe just burn their homes to the ground. Sorry, not that. Don't do that. I got a little excited there. And if this video does not come out on Halloween because I'm too tired to stay up editing all damn night because I chose to have 2 children and a very demanding job and have effectively destroyed my ability to enjoy doing fun hobbies and adult activities for the last 16 years and for at least the next 8 years, happy fucking Halloween anyway. All right, that's enough unhinged preamble. Let's get down to business. Nightmares and Dreamscapes, 1993 collection of short stories ranked. Number 24, Brooklyn, August. This short poem was an homage to baseball with a number of famous players mentioned and the memories King likely has from those days during his childhood. As short poems go, it's fine, but it doesn't speak to me in any personally affecting way. I don't have much to say about it other than to say I'm sure to those who can relate to King's love of baseball and share those fond memories, it's likely a much more impactful poem. Number 23, Sorry, Right Number. A woman receives an ominous phone call. Something is wrong, someone is in trouble, someone close to her, but she can't figure out who the call came from and just what they were trying to warn her about. Eventually, she gets the answers to her questions, but by then it's too late for her to stop the inevitable from happening. I listened to the audio version of Sorry, Right Number, as I did with all the stories from this collection, but I have to say, this was a truly unbearable experience for me. Rather than being read by a single narrator as the other stories were, this was performed by a cast of different voice actors, and was treated as a radio drama because, well, that's what it was written as. That was the medium King had intended it to be presented in when he wrote it, but the voice actors were not great, the sound effects were kinda awful, the mixing was off, and I just had a hard time not being annoyed by the entire thing. The story itself has a twist ending that I felt was predictable, but I didn't hate the story itself. I admit the performance on this one just kind of ruined it for me, which is a shame since this was the one story in this collection that was made first and foremost for the audio medium. Number 22, The Beggar and the Diamond. The archangel Uriel goes to God and directs his attention to a poor, sick, wandering man on earth. Uriel's heart breaks for the man. He's hungry, without shelter, covered in sores, and ridiculed by cruel people everywhere he goes. God tells Uriel that this is the man's purpose in life, and that when he dies, another man will take his place. In an effort to teach Uriel a lesson, God places a diamond in the road. This diamond is huge and would give the poor man enough money to solve all of his earthly problems, but through what seems like a cruel twist of fate, the man does not see the diamond. He passes it by, never knowing how close he has come to life-changing riches. However, in the end, he is grateful to God for what few blessings he does have, and he praises God, forgetting for a time just how unfortunate he is. The Beggar and the Diamond is an interpolation of a Hindu parable that was told to King orally, and I interpreted this story in 2 ways, or rather, there were 2 separate, concurrent, morals perhaps. The first is that when you're down and out, when you're suffering, even if you only have one thing left to be grateful for, that you should be grateful, that regardless of your life's circumstances, you should hold on to whatever positive thoughts you have left and remain steadfast in your faith. The other moral, or maybe it's less a moral and just a takeaway, is that according to this parable, or at least King's version of it, it's that God is cruel and uncaring and is content to let those who are suffering go on suffering. God has chosen some people to struggle in pain and poverty in perpetuity, and he expects them to be grateful for what little comfort and solace he provides them, to praise his name no matter how destitute, no matter how desperate they become, and that is an integral part of religion and faith in just about every one of the 10,000 or so existing religions, an unflinching, uncompromising belief and trust in a higher power who supposedly has the ability to solve all of your problems, to give you utopia, but instead allows suffering and death and cancer and school shootings and natural disasters and war and famine, and expects you, demands you to be grateful for the fucking table scraps of joy you might salvage. But don't worry, you'll go to heaven when you die if your faith is steadfast enough. And then God may see fit to not continue to allow you to suffer. Or if you're of the Christian faith, maybe you'll burn in hell for eternity if your belief and your faith is determined to be inadequate. What a benevolent dickhole. Yeah, it's an interesting little parable that got me thinking likely far more deeply and far more cynically than was intended. And if I'm being honest, more than anything, it just made me mad. Number 21, Head Down. In this story, King chronicles the journey of his son Owen's Little League baseball team. At times it reads like a play-by-play by a sportscaster, but at others it's a touching testament to the values and bonds that can be learned and developed through the sport of baseball. We follow, by way of King, the team and their coaches, all the way to the regional finals and beyond. We share in their triumphs as well as their defeats, and it's a surprisingly emotional story that even us non-sports fans can appreciate. I hadn't expected to take much away from this story, but the compassion and caring nature of the coaches, the way in which the players come to love and trust in each other, and just being able to view this seemingly insignificant season of Little League baseball through King's lens was a unique and uplifting read. It made me wish I had given team sports more of a go when I was young, but unfortunately my experience was more of bullying and being made fun of and, being called the F slur by my own teammates. So naturally I didn't have the same positive reinforcement that the kids in King's story did. But I can imagine how it must have felt for those kids in this story, and for many kids like them whose time spent on the field was some of the best days of their youth. Number 20, The Doctor's Case. It's a dreary, rainy day in London when Holmes and Watson are called to the scene of a seemingly inexplicable murder. The wealthy patriarch of a, by all accounts, dysfunctional family has been killed following the amendment of his last will and testament. He has chosen to leave his family nothing and to donate his fortune to a home for wayward cats. Presumably his family didn't take kindly to this decision to strip them of their inheritance, and at least one of them is likely guilty for the killing of the perhaps cruel and now very dead former leader of their family. Holmes and Watson work to solve the mystery, but it is Watson who ultimately determines just what happened and who is responsible for this act of patricide. This is, of course, Stephen King's take on Sherlock Holmes. It's not a bad story, but as someone who has never really been fond of the works of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, I wasn't all that interested in this story either. However, in both King and Conan Doyle's defense, I've never really taken the time to acquaint myself with the Sherlock Holmes stories, so to say I don't care for them would be unfair. But what I have read of them just hasn't really been my cup of tea. Number 19, Chattery Teeth. A traveling salesman named Hogan stops at a ramshackle roadside shop in the desert to fuel up. While inside, he notices a pair of novelty wind-up teeth. After some negotiation, he ends up taking the wind-up teeth with him, but they don't seem to actually work. On his way back to the van, he offers a hitchhiker a ride, something he comes to regret. While driving in a sandstorm that has drastically reduced visibility, the hitchhiker pulls a knife and attempts to hijack the van. Having none of it and realizing the hitchhiker has neglected to fasten his seatbelt, Hogan purposely drives off the road in an effort to injure and disarm the hitchhiker. When the dust settles, the hitchhiker is still alive and the salesman finds that he is trapped. Looking to finish what he started, the hitchhiker reclaims his knife and prepares to strike. But the Chattery Teeth come to life, seemingly in order to defend their new owner, and they take care of the knife-wielding hitchhiker in gruesome fashion. This is a fun little story, and I was reminded of King's short story, The Monkey. It was the whole silly, normally harmless novelty toy comes to life thing. And like the toy monkey from The Monkey, the Chattery Teeth also have a way of returning to their rightful owner. However, unlike the monkey, the Chattery Teeth are in the business of protecting their master rather than causing unforeseen harm to those around them. While Chattery Teeth is not among my favorites from the collection, it is by no means an unenjoyable read. It just didn't have the depth or meaningful subtext that a great many of these other stories do. There isn't an embedded moral or thematic implication, and that's not to say those sorts of interpretive threads are imperative. I just happen to enjoy the stories that go to greater depths more. Number 18, Sneakers. A rookie recording engineer finally gets a chance to work with some big league artists and fellow record producers. The building he is working in holds many different recording and rehearsal studios, so there are all sorts of industry opportunities and connections opening up to him. One reputable record producer in particular has brought him into work on a project and takes the up-and-coming engineer under his wing. It's all very exciting, but there's something weird going on in one of the studio complex's bathrooms. He sees the same pair of sneakers under the stall wall in the same bathroom on a number of occasions. The person wearing the sneakers never moves, no matter how much time has passed. Eventually, the need to know who is in the stall gets the better of him, and he opens the stall door to see who or what those sneakers belong to, and he finds out more than he'd bargained for. This is a fun, weird little story. It's a more traditional ghost story in some respects, but it's a unique take on the genre. While Sneakers isn't among my favorites in the collection, it is by no means a boring or uninteresting story. As someone who has an interest in and works within the music industry, I found some of it to be quite hilarious and relatable. The twist ending isn't all that unpredictable, at least not entirely. King has a tendency to telegraph his moves a lot of the time, but he does throw a curveball or two on occasion, and he does that in this story to some extent. Number 17, Suffer the Little Children. Miss Sidley, an elderly school teacher with a reputation for being strict and unpleasant to her students, is teaching class when she notices something unusual about one of her students. His face seemed to change, but only for a flicker of a moment. However, as time goes on, Miss Sidley is forced to confront the student for his uncharacteristic behavior, and that is when he reveals to her his true form. He tells his teacher that he is not the only student like him, and that their numbers are growing. Left with no choice but to act, Miss Sidley devises and executes a plan to dispatch the imposter students, one after another. This story starts off feeling like a paranoid delusion or a manifestation from a fraying mind, but by the end, the reader is led to believe that Miss Sidley wasn't just some crazy old woman who snapped, but the actions she takes against the children are shocking and disturbing regardless of what she believed to be true. I enjoyed this story and felt it was King's own version of something akin to Invasion of the Body Snatchers. While it didn't land very high in my ranking, that's only because there were so many other, even better stories. Number 16, dedication. A poor black woman named Martha has a job working as a hotel maid. Her husband and biological father to her unborn child is killed in a robbery gone wrong, but it's no great loss. Martha wants to ensure her child won't turn out like his no-good father, and she knows someone she wants her son to emulate, an old writer who has been staying at the hotel where she works. When she visits a local woman, a practitioner of what she refers to as Bruja magic, she is given what looks like a mushroom and very little instruction in regards to what to do with it. But when the time comes, she knows not only when to use it, but how to use it. But there's something else, a compulsion that overtakes Martha that causes her to do something truly bizarre, which seemingly causes her child, which is still within her womb, to turn out like that old writer she used to work for when he gets older. Okay, so how can I put this gently? It's his cum. She eats the old writer's load off his bed sheets on numerous occasions. Like, homie apparently just rubs one out directly into his sheets with regularity, and when Martha changes the bedding, she just slurps it down. So that, who does that? Not the slurping the cum down thing. That too, but who just blasts their baby butter into their sheets? I guess when you've got someone changing your bedding for you on a regular basis, you might be less concerned about it. But come on, dude, use a sock or some tissues or something. You can't just pound the old pork chop and just lay in it after you basted the butterball. Have some self-respect, man. Also, and this could perhaps just be me reading too much into the story, but it felt a little eugenics-y. Like Martha doesn't want her black son to turn out like his no-good, cheating, abusive, criminal black father. So instead, she works to increase her son's likelihood of displaying more desirable, heritable characteristics by chum-guzzling the spend of an old, famous, wealthy, white, racist writer. It's just, I don't know, it felt like it was right on the precipice of being some weird planned breeding racial improvement thing. Yeesh. Overall, though, it was a unique, unusual, and nasty little story. Number 15, The Fifth Quarter. While doing time, a man befriends one of his prison mates. Following his release, the prison mate gets caught up in a heist gone bad, and one of the three people he pulled the job with tries to take him out and take his piece of the pie. In an effort to avenge his friend and to determine the location of what turns out to be a buried treasure, the lone assailant takes on his deceased prison mate's partners in crime. He takes them down one at a time, but two of his victims put up a hell of a fight, and what initially seemed like light work suddenly turns into a gunfight with one truly fearsome assassin. This is a high-octane story that kept me on the edge of my seat. It reminded me of something out of a Scorsese film. Not quite a crime noir, but something that harkened back to the era of cold case crime stories and shoot-'em-up thrillers that King has often found influence and taken up residence in. In the notes section of Nightmares and Dreamscapes, King confesses that this was potentially going to be a Bachman story, or maybe a George Stark story. Bachman is, of course, King's long-ago retired pseudonym, and George Stark was the alter ego of Thad Beaumont in The Dark Half. It's wild to think that at one point, King was writing not as his own alter ego, but as if he were the alter ego of a writer character that he created in a story which was essentially about the travails and tribulations of the death of his own pseudonym. I don't even know if there is a term for that, but I imagine that as a writer of fiction, it's a brilliant way to break yourself out of the confines of your typical style and subject matter and explore some unfamiliar territory. Number 14. Popsy. Sheridan has found himself indebted to some dangerous dudes. His gambling problem has gotten the better of him, and now in an effort to pay back what he owes, he has been abducting and delivering children to his creditors in order to avoid any repercussions for being unable to pay them back the thousands of dollars he owes. Well, Sheridan spots his next abductee outside of a shopping center, a young boy no older than 5 who has been separated from his adult. Sheridan swoops in and promises to help the boy find his adult, a person the boy keeps calling Popsy. Sheridan assures him that if he just get in the van, he would help him find his Popsy. After some light coaxing, the boy obliges, and it doesn't take long before the child realizes he's been tricked. The kid puts up a fight, an impressive one for a kid his age, but Sheridan manages to overpower him. The boy warns Sheridan that his Popsy will find him, that his Popsy can smell him, that his Popsy can fly. Sheridan shrugs it off, but he soon discovers that Popsy has managed to track them down, and he doesn't take kindly to the kidnapping. Sheridan quickly discovers that everything the kid had said about Popsy was true, and that's the last realization he is afforded. This is one of those occasional King stories where you end up rooting for the monster because the man, the central character, is too deplorable and reprehensible to be considered a protagonist of any sort. And the character of Popsy is like if Liam Neeson from Taken's particular set of skills were flying, blood-sucking, and superhuman strength. So when he tracks down Sheridan and his captive, it's a satisfying conclusion that sees the bad guy take out the arguably worse guy. Number 13. It Grows on You. A man named Joe Newell builds a large, unusual house for himself and his wife Cora in Castle Rock, Maine. The house has 12 rooms in all, and the townspeople murmur and speculate over why 2 people could possibly need such a sprawling, extravagant house. Eventually, Cora becomes pregnant, and what she gives birth to is rumored to be deformed, and its life is mercifully short. This begins a series of unfortunate events and a stigma amongst the townfolks that eventually leads to the deaths of both Cora and Joe. Several folks and families move into the house left by the Newells, but none stay for long. The locals believe the house is bad luck. Eventually, the house is left abandoned for years, but one day out of the blue, there appears to be a new addition being added to the dilapidated house. But who the new tenant may be and why they're building a new section on the house is unbeknownst to the residents of Castle Rock. And in this small Maine town, it's uncommon for something like this to fly under the radar of the watchful folks of the Rock, so just who is up there building and why? Well, we don't get the answers to those questions, but the elderly group of gentlemen whose recollections and ruminations provide us with the majority of the story thus far leave us to do exactly what they themselves are doing at the end of the story: speculating. King leaves the story open-ended. He gives us the history and a glimpse of the present developments, but leaves the future up to imagination and interpretation. And this history that we're privy to, that of the Newell family, is a sad and unfortunate one. We're led to believe that the Newell house is now likely haunted, that what happened to the Newells, some of which was in part due to the townspeople and their cruel harassment, has tainted the house. At its heart, this is a story of pain and suffering, and the reverberations such suffering leaves behind, and the nature of the house becoming a place which holds within it the psychic consequences of long-ago tragedies. which reminds me both of the Marston house from Salem's Lot and the Overlook Hotel from The Shining. Alright, we're halfway through and we've got 12 more stories to go, so if you've made it this far, won't you please consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, and following along as I slowly but surely make my way through everything Stephen King has ever written and inspired, for better or worse, till death do us part. I do, you may kiss the bride, thanks in advance. Number 12. Crouch End. An American couple, Doris and Lonnie Freeman, are on holiday in London with their children, and one evening during their stay, they decide to leave the kids at the hotel with their nanny in order to pay a visit to an associate of Lonnie's in the nearby town of Crouch End. After finally finding a cab that was willing to take them, the Freemans embark for Crouch End, but when they arrive, there's something wrong with the town. According to one seasoned policeman, the walls between realities, between dimensions, have become thin in Crouch End, and in some places those barriers have dissolved entirely, allowing interdimensional entities to enter into Crouch End and to abduct unsuspecting residents and visitors. And only one of the Freemans will manage to return to tell the tale. This story is not only inspired by Lovecraft, but one of the story's characters mentions Lovecraft by name and remarks that the otherworldly occurrences in Crouch End are reminiscent of Lovecraftian lore. This was presumably King's way of saying to us, yes, dear reader, this is 100% an unabashed, unrepentant homage to Lovecraft, and I'm not sorry. I thoroughly enjoyed this story, and the audio version is read by Tim Curry, which is an absolute treat that I highly recommend. Number 11. The End of the Whole Mess. In the final hours of his life, Howie tells us the story of his genius brother Bobby and his efforts to put an end to violence in the world. Bobby was a gifted child who graduated high school at the age of 10, and in his adulthood he had dedicated himself to that one singular goal of stopping the wars, gang violence, and violent acts committed by humans against their fellow man in general. Bobby believes there is something about the water supply in one particular place that leads to the residents being particularly non-violent, and so he finds a way to extract, concentrate, and distribute this naturally occurring serum to the entire world. And it works. For a few years, Earth is a peaceful place, but as time wears on, the unforeseen repercussions of Bobby's cure to violence have an unprecedented effect that damns the entire planet. There is an age-old adage that states, "The road to hell is paved with good intentions," and if that saying were to be turned into a short story, well, I suppose it would be a lot like this one. The way King tells it is unique, too. Our narrator, Howard, is telling the story by typing out a sort of historical record of everything that led to what is ultimately the end of life on Earth. As he types, he gradually loses his ability to form coherent thoughts, so toward the end of the story, the language and sentence structure has eroded away into typos and grammatical errors. Additionally, this is a story of a brother's love and admiration for his sibling. It's about the unconditional nature of that particular kind of love. Howard is supportive of and inspired by his brother, so even at the very end, when everything has gone catastrophically wrong, he doesn't blame Bobby or hold him in contempt. Bobby was trying to do good, to change the world for the better. His intentions were pure, regardless of their outcome, and Howard still loves him and holds him in high regard until the very end. Number 10. Rainy Season. After a long trip, a couple, John and Elise Graham, arrive in the small backroad town of Willow, Maine at around 5 p.m. on the 17th of June. They will be staying in Willow for the next 2 months and have come to what passed as Willow's downtown to purchase some goods and provisions from the general mercantile and hardware store before settling in for the evening. Before they'd even managed to walk inside the store, John and Elise receive an ominous warning from two locals. The pair of Willow natives tell them that every 7 years to the day on June 17th, the rainy season arrives in Willow, Maine. But as the locals tell them, it's not a typical torrential downpour. In Willow, every 7 years on June 17th, it rains toads. The Grahams believe the two local yokels are having them on, but these warnings are unnerving nonetheless. They urge the Grahams to take a hotel room outside of town for the night to spare themselves the trouble of rainy season and the torment of the toads. But the Grahams aren't buying it, and they dismiss the two as either pranksters or complete cranks. They simply don't believe them, and they disregard the whole interaction at their peril. This is a bizarre story, and having only read it once previously, I couldn't remember just why a rain of toads would be all that big of a deal, outside of it just being super weird. But suffice it to say, these are not your bog standard toads. Get it? Bog standard? Because there's toads in bogs, presumably. Sorry. Anyway, King invokes Shirley Jackson's story, The Lottery, and one of the story's characters, John Graham, is reminded of the story when the townspeople are trying to warn them off. And the parallels between the two stories are readily apparent. Like Jackson's The Lottery, rainy season is a story of ritual sacrifice. Over the years, the residents of the respective stories have come to accept their unusual practices and superstitious customs as just a part of life. They've become accustomed to it, even though they likely know it's not ethical or practical. Both are stories of how people are willing to sacrifice others for the sake of their own prosperity, to give the powers that be what they want or risk becoming a victim themselves. The big difference between Jackson and King's stories, though, is that the toads, the powers that be in rainy season, are provably real and not just a tradition or superstition, as seems to be the case with the lottery. Number 9. Dolans Cadillac. A widower is out for revenge. 7 years ago, a notorious mobster, Dolan, killed his beloved wife in order to keep her from testifying against him. And so Dolan is still out there living the high life, throwing extravagant parties, a different girl on his arm every night, riding around in his expensive car, his Cadillac. But Dolan is unaware that for the last 7 years, he has been under regular surveillance. The widower has been playing the long game, and through patience, determination, and careful planning, he lays a desert trap for Dolan to exact his revenge. All the while, he hears the voice of his murdered wife, urging him on, never allowing him to lose sight of his goal: to make Dolan pay for what he has done, no matter the cost. This is one of those viscerally satisfying stories that awakens that primal desire for retribution and gives the reader exactly that, just a deep primal satisfaction. King pushes those buttons in just the right way, and he builds our sympathy for the protagonist so that everything he does, regardless of its unlawful nature, feels entirely warranted and justified. Again, I'm reminded of the movie Taken and the way it made me feel when I first watched it. It's a sort of elation in seeing what can best be described as hyper-focused, unrelenting vigilante justice. With Liam Neeson's character, and likewise the protagonist of Dolan's Cadillac, I can imagine myself in their shoes and the lengths I would go, the measures I would be willing to take to avenge my family, and yeah, it feels good when those who have been so deeply wronged get the last laugh. This is a great story, and the feelings it evokes speak to my caveman brain very effectively. Number 8. The Night Flyer. Richard Dees is a reporter for a sensationalist rag, the kind of paper that reports on alien abductions, Bigfoot sightings, Bat-Boy, and the like. But Dees knows that nothing sells papers quite like blood and guts, so when an actual story about an airport-hopping serial killer and a puddle jumper falls into his lap, he is dead set on not only getting the story, but in solving the mystery of the fly-by-night killer. After a number of visits to a few small-town airports, Dees begins to piece together just who or what he is dealing with, and eventually he comes face to face with the Night Flyer himself. The Night Flyer is an entertaining story and is one of two stories about vampires from Nightmares and Dreamscapes. King has, of course, famously written about vampires in Salem's Lot and the short stories One for the Road and Jerusalem's Lot, but The Night Flyer is a distinctly different take on the vampire trope. In the aforementioned Salem's Lot-centric stories, the vamps come to town and infiltrate a community, gradually overtaking everyone over time. But in The Night Flyer, the vampire is on the move, never staying in one place for too long or putting down stakes. So while vampires aren't new to King, he is sure to take a different approach this time around and imagine a less sedentary, more adventurous blood-sucking fiend. In the author's note at the end of Nightmares and Dreamscapes, King lets us know that Popsy, the winged vampire grandpa from the story of the same name, is quite likely the same creature from the Night Flyer, but that he may not have immediately realized it when writing Popsy. Number 7. The 10 O'Clock People. Brendan Pearson is outside the bank he works at for his 10 a.m. smoke break when he sees what looks like a deformed bat creature with a human body enter the bank. Before he can totally freak out, a man grabs him and calms him down. The man, whose name is Duke, saw the bat-headed creature too, and he tells Pearson that there are more of these freakish creatures, but that not everyone can see them. These bat men and women have been systematically taking over or replacing actual people, powerful people, over time, and these bat people are killing and eating folks. And Pearson comes to find that those like himself who can see them, the 10 O'Clock People, have come under attack and now have begun to band together to figure out what to do and how to deal with the bat people. Duke brings Pearson to a meeting of those who can see the power-hungry creatures, but it turns out to be a trap, and Pearson barely escapes with his life. A life which will never be the same again. There is likely a deeper meaning behind the 10 O'Clock People, but I admittedly had a hard time at first sussing out just what it was. In part, there was a commentary on how acceptable practices like smoking have found their way out of the realm of acceptable behavior, and King makes comparisons between smokers with segregation-era designated spaces for black people. He kind of compares being a smoker in the 90s to being a person of color who is being discriminated against during the civil rights era, or rather the protagonist Pearson does. So I don't want to insinuate that King himself felt that smokers were experiencing something akin to segregation, but I found the comparison absurd regardless of whether it was the author or the protagonist's perspective. Another angle to view the story, and this is likely the intended interpretation, was that the story was about corruption and how people in positions of power can turn into inhuman monsters, and they will go after and attack those who see them for what they are or threaten to challenge that power. And these folks that the powerful view as second-class citizens, the 10 O'Clock People, are viewed by the powerful folks, the Bat People, as a disposable resource to be chewed up and used as they pursue greater heights of influence, wealth, and dominance. The 10 O'Clock People is an analogy for classism and for the old adage, absolute power corrupts absolutely. Number 6. Home Delivery. Indecisive Maddie Pace lives on Little Tall Island and is pregnant. Her husband and father to her child has suddenly died. Her life, which was already overwhelming, has been thrown into disarray. So when the zombie apocalypse begins, she's already been through the ringer. But she finds within herself a will and determination to survive. She is going to have this baby, come hell or high water. Zombie apocalypse be damned. Of all the horror tropes and classic themes King has borrowed from and paid homage to, for the majority of his career he kept from doing a Romero-style zombie story for quite some time. Yes, there are arguably a few of his stories that incorporate zombie-like creatures and characters. Pet Sematary comes to mind, but he hadn't gone full-blown Night of the Living Dead. Not until this story, anyway. At least not that I can recall. In fact, this story was intentionally written with the Romero zombie apocalypse in mind, as it was originally part of a collection of stories called Book of the Dead, in which all of the contributing authors were asked to write a story within the premise of the Romero zombie apocalypse universe. King would of course go on to further explore something like a zombie apocalypse in his novel Cell some 13 years later. And in Home Delivery, his approach is a familiar one for King. He takes a small, isolated community and uses it as a microcosm. He focuses on one small town and the residents within to paint a broader picture. We can imagine ourselves and our communities in their place, were we to find ourselves in a similar situation, the town coming together to support the pregnant widow after her husband's tragic death, and likewise to defend and protect each other in the face of an imminent, unprecedented threat. I didn't think this story was going to rank so high, honestly, but what can I say? I'm a sucker for a good zombie apocalypse story. Number 5. You know they've got a hell of a band. While on an adventure through the less traveled roads of rural Oregon, Mary and Clark get themselves properly lost. When they've just about given up hope, they come upon a picturesque little town with the unusual name of Rock and Roll Heaven. Despite Mary's apprehension, Clark convinces her that rather than turn around and try to retrace their steps, they ought to check out this odd little oasis of a village, if for no other reason than to make a quick stop at the quaint little diner for a bite to eat. Mary acquiesces, but once inside the diner, she and Clark begin to notice some familiar faces among the wait and kitchen staff, and both Mary and Clark come to regret their decision to stop. You see, it appears that most of the folks here in Rock and Roll Heaven, well, they're all dead rock stars, those who died young and due to any variety of unfortunate circumstances. But this little slice of heaven fast becomes a nightmare for our unsuspecting adventurers when the undead legends won't allow them to leave. This is a very unique story that feels like an episode of The Twilight Zone crossbred with The Night of the Living Dead, but there's a lot more to it than that. There were 2 potential interpretations I took away from the story. The first was that perhaps this is a commentary on stardom and the almost requisite narcissistic nature of fame and those who seek it. The whole reason the dead rock stars won't let the couple leave is that they crave an audience. Even in death, they need people to perform for, and they're willing to kidnap and essentially imprison people just to have that audience that they desire. The second was about the immortalization that these deceased rock and roll legends have experienced. They have all captured an audience that somehow perpetuates and continues even several decades after their untimely deaths. It's a testament to the power these iconic performers have held over their fans, how they have managed to remain household names even all these many years later, and how they continue to make new fans even after their deaths. Number 4. Omni's Last Case. A private detective, Omni, takes to the streets of LA and starts his day the same way he always does. It's a beautiful morning, everything seems right with the world until things start to go wrong. Significant changes to his life, to his world, begin to occur, one after another and in rapid succession. Omni, feeling overwhelmed and confused, retreats to his office only to find things are off there too. He sits behind his desk, head in his hands, trying to make sense of it all when there's a knock at the office door. Despite his requests that whoever it is go away and leave him alone, the visitor lets themselves in and takes a seat across the desk from Omni. When he looks up at his visitor, he recognizes him right away. He's looking into the face of himself, and while there are some noticeable differences, it is undoubtedly him, but not exactly. This visitor, this imposter, reveals to Omni that he has come to replace him, to take over his life, and what happens to Omni, well, that's of no concern to this man. The visitor's life has been full of pain and sadness, but in Omni's world, as Omni, he can write whatever life he chooses, and so he does what he came to do and sends Omni off into oblivion. Only it's likely not the last he'll be hearing from the man whose life he stole. Omni's last case is the story of a man looking to escape into a fictional world of his own creation, one in which the harsh realities of his own life cannot reach him, a world in which he knows no pain, where death and disease can be left unwritten. At its heart, it's about escapism and the way in which a writer, king perhaps in this instance, can submerge himself in his work and create whatever world he wants, can be whoever he wants to be, is able to live another life within the pages and the words. And that's something we may find ourselves doing as readers as well. These stories, those of Stephen King and the authors whose work draws us in and speaks to us, their words and their works occupy and fill our minds. They allow us to imagine ourselves elsewhere, to take ourselves out of our own lives and into the lives of others. It's a testament to the power of a good story and how sometimes we might desire to be able to live those fictional lives when our own lives become more than we can bear. Number 3, My Pretty Pony. A young boy takes a stroll through the family apple orchard with his elderly, unwell grandfather. The old man knows he doesn't have a lot of time left, and he decides to share some, not advice, but instruction with his grandson. He tells the young boy his thoughts on the nature of time and the way in which it imperceptibly changes speed over the course of one's life. The old man explains that there are essentially 3 kinds of time: long time, short time, and my pretty pony time. He tells his grandson of how, when you're young, time seems to stretch out and take forever, and then at some point it becomes my pretty pony time, where time seems to pass at a normal rate of speed. When you've entered into your glory days, so to speak. And then as you get older, time begins to speed up. Days pass more rapidly, months go by in the blink of an eye, time becomes slippery. The old man tells his grandson these things in an effort to advise him to embrace that in-between time, where time passes at its true speed, that time he refers to as my pretty pony. And he instructs his grandson to keep this instruction in mind so that he may perhaps be able to hold on to those my pretty pony days just a little while longer, or at least to fully appreciate them while they last. This is a profound, relatable story that resonates with me on a personal level. When I was younger, in my teens and 20s, I can recall being told, or rather I was warned by my elders, that as you get older, time will begin to speed past you, that one day your kids are in diapers and the next they're graduating from high school, and I never took those warnings seriously, but now I find myself watching as entire months flash by in what feels like a week or two. Today, the day I'm writing this, is September 26th, and I'd swear that Labor Day weekend was just last week. That whole month just came and went, and fall arrived in New York out of nowhere, and my son turned 16 in October, and that first decade after he was born felt like the fastest 10 years of my life, but somehow the next 6 seem to have gone by even faster, and now today, the day I'm recording this, is October 30th. His birthday already happened. My daughter turned 10 2 weeks ago. How did this happen? They tried to warn me, and I never fully understood or appreciated it until the last few years. All at once, I'm 41 years old with a teenager and a 10-year-old, and I've been married for nearly 2 decades. The last time I checked, I was 27 with a 2-year-old and a fiance. Anyway, it's all true what the old-timers told me, and I'm going to make a conscious effort to keep my pretty pony in mind in hopes that things might slow back down just a little. But even in the month since writing this, an entire month has gone by, and I would swear I wrote that a couple days ago. Number 2, the moving finger. Howard is a man who has all the answers. He knows what his wife will say before she says it. His job is a bore, but he's naturally good at what he does. He is warm and safe. He is ultimately content. Until one day he hears a strange sound coming from his bathroom. He suspects it's a mouse or a rat, vermin of some sort, but when he goes to investigate, he finds a human finger poking up out of the drain in the sink. He plugs the drain and tries to convince himself that he imagined the whole thing, but the finger comes back. He's concerned that he may be losing his mind and decides he can't tell his wife, but the finger isn't going away, and it seems to be growing longer. Eventually, the finger transforms into a serpent-like creature, and the man is forced to defend himself using some battery-powered hedge trimmers. After an all-out battle to the death, he defeats the finger and manages to chop it into small pieces and flush them down the toilet. So when the cops arrive, they discover a grisly scene that they can't fully comprehend. This story is more than it appears to be at first glance. Yes, it is a super weird story about a sentient finger moving and thinking of its own volition, but there's also an undercurrent in which King approaches and comments on the mundanity, there it is, and predictability of day-to-day life, and how when something circumvents and disrupts that melancholic existence, it can be truly jarring. The protagonist has fallen into a years-long routine, a comfort zone, and when that familiar existence is interrupted, his mind works vigorously to pretend that the disruptor, the finger coming up out of the drain, is not and could not be there. It's simply not a part of the routine, and how this intrusion, the unexpected and inexplicable Kool-Aid man just blasting through the wall into an otherwise unremarkable life, can be genuinely distressing. It's a great story, and it's this commentary that King weaves in that places it in my top 5. Number 1, The House on Maple Street. 4 siblings find themselves living with a stepfather who treats them terribly, but even worse, his abusive behavior has had an undeniable effect on their mother. She's losing weight, spends a lot of time in bed due to regular headaches that can last days at a time, and is deeply depressed. But one day something odd starts to happen in their home. The siblings discover that behind the walls, where there should be plaster and insulation, some sort of metal has begun to grow. It begins to slowly, subtly transform their home into something else, something resembling a spaceship of sorts. The kids keep this secret transformation to themselves, and following a particularly upsetting incident which saw their mother belittled, embarrassed, and shamed, the kids devise a plan to rid themselves of their evil stepfather and to save their mother from his destructive behavior once and for all. This story is a childhood fantasy told from the perspective of a group of siblings who want nothing more than to escape the toxic clutches of their emotionally, verbally, and physically abusive stepfather, and above all, they want to save their mom. They have to. I can't imagine what it would be like as a child to have to witness someone treating your mother that way and the effect it would have on you emotionally. I was lucky in that way to not have that kind of upbringing. It's a beautiful ending, though. These kids band together and they give up everything, their personal belongings, their clothes, their toys, and their entire house to save their mother, to save their family. The story ends with the kids sitting together in the pouring rain, waiting for their mom to get home. They're smiling and laughing. All they have left is each other, and that's what genuinely matters to them. That's enough. I loved this story. The end. All right, so holy shit, that was a lot of words. My throat hurts from saying all of them. I hope everyone enjoyed the video, and I'd love to hear what you thought about my ranking in the comments. Was it trash? Did you hate it? Am I an utter buffoon who has no business pretending I know what makes a good story? The answers to those questions are maybe, probably, and most definitely, respectively, but I hope you'll tell me how you felt about it anyway. Thank you for watching. Please click the thing so you can get a notification on the rare occasion I actually have time to make a f***ing video. Life is chaos, and I'm desperate for a break, but it looks like the only break I'm going to get anytime soon is a mental one. Okay, I love you. Get some sleep. Eat your veggies. Call your mom, unless she's an asshole or dead. Okay, happy Halloween. Goodbye. Be sure to click like and subscribe to the channel for my continued analysis of all things Stephen King. My name is Mr. Doyle, and this has been a great undertaking.